Much of India's history since the foundation of the Mughal Empire in 1526 up to the modern day has been one of religious division, abuse of the poor, and a nation contending with much political and economical instability. But what if I were to tell you that the roots of much of these past and current issues could be linked to the death of a singular individual? A person whose premature passing 300 years ago caused ripple effects that would change the trajectory of Indian history forever, but also result in a permanent divide between Hindu and Muslim Indians, which is still felt even to this day. And the historical figure I am referring to is none other than the Mughal prince Dara Shikoh, who was the heir apparent to the Mughal Empire, and he was an intelligent, liberal and open-minded individual who was respected by people from all religions and walks of life. And in this video we will discuss the impact his death had not only on Indian history but world history as well, and all the major historical events that would not have occurred if he hadn't been executed by his brother Aurangzeb. But before we begin, don't forget, if you want to find out more about the deaths of some of history's greatest figures, then subscribe to my channel Historical Exit. Dara Shikoh was born in the year 1615 and he was the eldest son of the 5th Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan, who is most well remembered to history today for creating the Taj Mahal, and he was the heir apparent to the throne of the Mughal Empire, as Dara Shikoh's well-mannered nature, intellect and respect for all religious groups made him the ideal ruler for a nation as diverse and expansive as India. And many, including Shah Jahan, recognized that India, ruled by Dara Shikoh, had significant potential to be a prosperous and powerful nation, as the wealth of the Mughal Empire during this time period was immense, with economist Angus Maddison purporting that during the 1600s the Mughal Empire controlled nearly 25% of global GDP. For comparison, the British Empire at this time barely composed 2% of global GDP. Therefore, it is not difficult to imagine how powerful an empire that controlled so much wealth could be if it had religious and political stability within its domain. And out of the 4 sons of Shah Jahan, Dara Shikoh was the only son that possessed the personality traits and foresight necessary to ensure that religious tensions in India stayed dormant. This was because from a young age Dara Shikoh had embraced a philosophy of religious synthesis and tolerance, a frame of thought that sought to bridge the divide between Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism and Sikhism by highlighting the similarities between the religions rather than causing division over their differences. Dara Shikoh was so dedicated and devoted to this task of religious unity and harmony that he personally translated 50 Upanishads, which are sacred Hindu texts, into Persian so that the Hindu doctrine could be better understood by Muslim scholars. His translations are referred to as the Sir-e-Akbar, the Great Mystery today, and within his work he claims that the Quran is actually a direct descendant or spin-off of the Hindu Upanishads, as there is so much overlap between the two religions when viewed through a spiritual lens. Needless to say though, that such controversial and liberal views did not sit well with many Islamic scholars and noblemen, with his greatest detractor being his younger brother Aurangzeb, who was a devout Muslim adhering to an extremely orthodox Islamic viewpoint, believing that Muslims had a divine mandate to rule over all of India and that all religions besides Islam should be secondary in the Mughal Empire. And this frame of thought was not only highly troublesome but also exceptionally dangerous, as Muslims made up only a small minority of India's population, and it would be very difficult and costly to try and subdue a Hindu majority country like India with Sharia law. But the way both these brothers viewed religious differences and the need for religious tolerance ensured that both princes had completely opposing views and thoughts on how India should be ruled. And the tension between the two siblings would eventually reach boiling point and lead to a war of succession when Shah Jahan would fall severely ill in 1657 and become unable to effectively lead the Mughal Empire. This was the moment both Dara Shikoh and Aurangzeb had been waiting for, as the Mughal Empire's throne sat vacant waiting for the prince who was most deserving to be sat upon it. Both princes gathered their armies and called upon their allies readying for battle. Dara Shikoh fighting for religious tolerance and liberalism, and Aurangzeb spearheading a growing movement of strict Islamic orthodoxy and Sharia law. The winner of this war would not only become the ruler of the richest empire in the world, but also shape the trajectory of India for centuries to come. At the start of the war, Dara Shikoh looked like he had a very promising chance of being the victor of the War of Succession, as he was the designated heir and he held the capital city alongside access to an immense treasury and a large army at his disposal. However, his brother Aurangzeb was also equally as well supported by many powerful Muslim nobles, but also some Hindu Rajput clans as well. The two brothers would eventually clash in two major battles, with Dara Shikoh being decisively defeated first at the Battle of Darmat in 15 April 1658 due to the superior artillery equipment possessed by the forces of Aurangzeb, which killed many of Dara Shikoh's Rajput soldiers as they couldn't get past the barrage of muskets, arrows and cannon fire. And unfortunately for Dara Shikoh and all of India, he would face an even greater defeat at the Battle of Samagarh on 29 May 1658, where Aurangzeb's artillery again dominated the flow of battle, further assisted by the squabbling of the Rajput clans under the command of Dara Shikoh, who refused to join together to become one cohesive force and would only take orders from their own respective leaders. All in all, Aurangzeb was a far more gifted military strategist than Dara Shikoh, and his troops were the veterans of many battles, while Dara Shikoh's forces consisted of many poorly trained and poorly equipped new recruits, as well as Rajput warriors who failed to work effectively together. All of these losses would eventually force Dara Shikoh to flee to Sindh to find refuge with his longtime friend and ally Malik Jivan, whose life Dara Shikoh had supposedly saved when his father Shah Jahan wanted him executed. However, his faith in Malik Jivan was misplaced, as he would betray Dara Shikoh and hand him over to Aurangzeb, who would have him chained and paraded throughout the streets of Delhi as a traitor. Dara Shikoh was a prince who was far too popular with the common folk, and he was a huge threat to Aurangzeb's newly established rule. So therefore, on August 30th, 1659, Dara Shikoh was charged with apostasy to Islam and was executed for his crimes on the orders of his younger brother Aurangzeb, the 6th Mughal Emperor. And such was the cruelty of Aurangzeb that he would send the severed head of Dara Shikoh to their very ill and imprisoned father Shah Jahan, highlighting how he had triumphed over his favored son and had successfully become the new Mughal emperor in the end. And the succession of Aurangzeb to the Mughal throne ushered in decades of religious persecution and civil strife that would fatally weaken the empire from within, as he would have to face the armies of the Sikhs, Hindu Jats, Pashtuns and the Marathas, with many of these rebellions starting in opposition to Aurangzeb's tyrannical rule and his imposition of Sharia-based law. And these civil wars would last well over 40 years and cause the treasury of the Mughal Empire to be largely drained by the time of Aurangzeb's death in 1707. During the 50 years Aurangzeb was on the throne, the Sikh gurus and Hindu Brahmins faced systematic oppression, Hindu temples were destroyed, and the jizya tax was reimposed on non-Muslims, creating resentment and tensions that would fuel rebellions across the subcontinent for the rest of the Mughal Empire's reign, which would come to an end in 1857. Had Dara Shikoh ascended to the throne as intended, his policies of religious accommodation and acceptance might have created a stable and unified India that could have effectively resisted the colonial ambitions of the European invaders, who were only successful in their endeavors due to the religious divides already present within India at the time. The implications of this alternative timeline are breathtaking in scope if one takes a moment to consider how different India may have been if Aurangzeb hadn't become the 6th Mughal emperor, such as the possibility that a strong and united Mughal empire under Dara Shikoh's tolerant rule might have prevented the British East India Company from exploiting Indian divisions to establish British control within the nation. And without British colonization, the systematic destruction of India's economy, the exacerbation of religious divides, and the devastating famines that killed millions of Indians, especially during World War II, would never have occurred. Most critically though, the partition of India in 1947, which displaced millions and caused hundreds of thousands of deaths, was rooted in the religious tensions that Aurangzeb's intolerant policies had initially flamed. And Dara Shikoh's vision of harmony might have created a modern India where Hindus, Muslims, Jains, Buddhists and Sikhs could coexist peacefully, fundamentally altering the geopolitical landscape of South Asia, as no separate nations like Pakistan or Bangladesh would have been created. While I understand these are all very fantastical claims, it is difficult to emphasize just how different Indian history may have been if a more tolerant ruler like Dara Shikoh had led the Mughal Empire when it was at the height of its power rather than a tyrant like Aurangzeb. So I hope you enjoyed this video on the life, deeds and death of Dara Shikoh. I know it is a bit different from my usual videos, but let me know in the comments down below if you enjoyed this type of content and if you would like to see videos on other lesser known figures whose death hugely impacted history and the world. And as always, if you want to find out more about the deaths of some of history's greatest figures, then subscribe to my channel Historical Exit, and thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye.